G'day groovers, rockers and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with the original bass player of AC/DC, Larry Van Kriedt. Larry was born into a musical family, being the son of jazz legend David Van Kriedt. In 1969, he and his family moved to Australia, and Larry soon met a young Angus Young. The two became friends and would jam at Angus's house regularly. In late 1973, Larry was asked to join a new band Malcom Young, Angus's brother, had just formed. It would soon become known as AC/DC. Larry would record 3 songs with the group and would play live gigs with the band till his departure in early 1974. After AC/DC, Larry remained in music and has been in bands since then such as Non-Stop Dancers and Afram. More recently, he has released his first solo album, Finally, in 2021, and has been busy with his company, Jazzbacks. G'day Larry, and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
Thank you, yeah. Thanks for having me.
I want to start off at the beginning. You were born in 1954 into a musical family. I mean, what do you remember of those early days in terms of the music you were kind of listening to and being like, yeah, just being exposed to?
Well, it was West Coast jazz, if you think of the beatnik days, very much like that kind of jazz, Chet Baker, Jerry Mulligan. My dad was a musician. He played with around San Francisco, California. My parents were just part of the jazz scene, really. California sunshine. Nice feeling. I just kind of grew up in that. We moved around a bit. We did live for quite a while in North Beach in San Francisco, kind of a cultural hotspot there, Kind of grew up watching people playing jazz and hearing it and all that sort of thing,
Yeah, absolutely. With your dad, I mean, a legendary jazz legend. I mean, how did he approach music with you? I mean, and what I mean by that, did he show you stuff on the piano a lot, or on the saxophone? How did he go about that with you, showing you music?
Well, he just really left me to my own devices, really. I mean, I used to just bang on the piano and make things up, because when you're a kid, a piano, you go and play on the notes, and it sounds like a huge, big sound, especially the deep notes and making the, stepping on the sustain pedal and stuff. And I used to just sort of spend a lot of time just playing with which probably very irritating noises to adults, but I had a good time. And I used to get the music paper and then just write notes on it. I didn't know what they meant. And then I'd write jazz at the top, but I'd spell it backwards because I didn't really know how to write at that point. And then my father would try to play it when he got home from work. He'd sit down and then try to play what I'd written. Yeah, he brought home us a double bass one day, and he took me into the room and he showed it to me and he goes, "Look at that." He goes, "That's yours." And it was, of course, about 4 times bigger than me. There's no way I could play that. But I did end up, playing double bass at school and stuff, and having some lessons and that kind of thing,
Yeah, and of course, I mean, we talked about that West Coast jazz to start with, but of course, I mean, 1954 when you were born, I mean, that was the year rock and roll began. And I mean, do you remember much about those rock and roll records? I mean, you were pretty young at the time they were kind of going, but do you remember much about them?
Well, you can always, hear radio. Yeah, it was always being played in cars and in shops and places. You could see the radio going. So I just spend what they're playing, just to hear blues stuff. And, and then, you had top 40 type radio stations, you always hear it on the street. People had transistor radios with speakers on them, and I walk around with them and stuff. People didn't walk around with headphones on in those days like they do now, so you could hear everything. Yeah, I used to hear all the songs that were on the radio, and I remember, the rock and roll thing, it was about, they had those kind of haircuts, with the slicked back hair, which kind of looked a bit funny to me. They looked a bit like rockabilly, I suppose. Still, they really did sort of dress a bit like that. And, but then you had, when the Beatles came along, overnight, their hairstyles changed. People sort of coming their hair forward without any grease in their hair, And the Beatles obviously had a huge impact on America overnight. Basically, just radio was, I think they had about 4 songs in the top 5,
Yeah.
All at once. It was a real big cultural kick, Suddenly, lots of American bands and all the British bands, the Stones and the Kinks, all that kind of thing on the radio. And, it's kind of an exciting time, living in San Francisco, you'd see there was its own kind of take on all that stuff was there, and so I had a lot of bands starting to play, just wild stuff, psychedelic. Probably wasn't very sophisticated, but it's like turning it up and putting the reverb on and kicking the amp to make the reverb go boom.
You mentioned a lot of those like early, like mid '60s groups there, and of course I've read that someone that had a big impact on you was Jimi Hendrix. His guitar playing. I mean, did that have a big impact on you?
I can remember I had a friend at school and used to go to his house sometimes, after school, and father had a really nice stereo with a proper nice turntable with a good stylus on it and high fidelity kind of thing. And his brother was going to uni, and his brother came home one weekend, and he knew I was into, like, I used to listen to all the records that he would have. And he said, listen, you can sit down and listen to this. And he put me in the chair in between the speakers, and he put the American release of Are You Experienced on. The first track is Purple Haze. And he turned it up. Nobody played guitar like that and got those kind of sounds before him, And it was just like, it was pretty mind-blowing, really, to hear that. And the whole album was great, yeah.
Moving forward maybe 1 or 2 years, 1969, you're 15 years old and your parents move to Australia, you go with them. I mean, what do you remember, like, that trip at all, like going to Australia? Like, what were your first impressions of Australia?
It was a real culture shock, and I really didn't know what to expect. I mean, when you think about it, 15 years old, it's not a good time to be put into just moved. So all my friends, everything, my relatives and all that, we had lots of cousins. It was a big family. We all kind of, everybody knew each other, and we'd always be seeing each other. And all that just finished for me, And I didn't really know, I didn't understand, I guess, totally what it meant. The first thing, we were on a migrant hostel for a few weeks before my parents found a house for us and stuff. It was kind of the end of the school year, so I didn't start going to the school yet because we were going to be moving. So there's no point going to school. And then, so I just kind of hung around and I brought a guitar with me. It's a Gibson ES-175. I don't know if you know guitars at all. It's a big hollow, semi-acoustic thing with humbuckers on it. Yeah, I brought that. And I can play it, because we used to jam and play blues and, just crank it up and let it rip, with my friends. And at this hostel, I was a bit of an introspective kind of kid. I wasn't like, I was a bit shy, kind of reserved, But I could see these other kids after their school, in their uniforms. See, we never wore uniforms, but they had uniforms on. And there was this one kid, one day he brought his guitar with him, and he was on the other side of this small kind of park. There's a few guys and a couple of girls. He was kind of showing off and dancing around like Chuck Berry or something. It was Angus Young. I didn't really know that at the time. There was no AC/DC then, but he's had this guitar. He was basically doing the act that he does on stage, really. School uniform and everything on already, way before AC/DC, you see. Anyway, one day they were there, and this other American kid, I think Angus was saying, I want to get a Gibson guitar. And this other American kid points to me and he goes, Larry's got a Gibson. He looks at me. He goes, You've got a Gibson? And I said, yeah. And he kind of looked me up and down, and then he looks at me in the eye and goes, bullshit. And of course, I didn't care if he believed me or not. And then he goes, have you really? And I said, yeah. He goes, can I see it? So I said, well, yeah, okay, but you can't bring all these kids in there with you, We went to have a look at it. He was really impressed. They were real Gibson, an actual Gibson. And I sort of just played some blues stuff, and he was completely blown out. He's, wow, you can really play, And he goes, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, nothing. He goes, come to my house after school. I'll come and get you and bring your guitar, and you can meet my brother. So the next day he came around, and so I got my guitar, packed up, and went down to his house and go in, and his mother's there, and she speaks with a really strong Scottish accent, very warm and friendly lady. And I couldn't understand a word she was saying. So Angus was translating for me from Scottish into an Aussie accent, which I could understand a bit. And he'd say, she likes American boys. And, we went into this room and there was Malcom sitting on a bed playing a guitar. But he had a turntable there and he'd play along with the records, And So Angus goes, "This is the boy I was talking about. This is Larry, He's got a Gibson." And Malcolm looks at me like, "So what?" Very unimpressed. Big deal. So anyway, get your guitar out, and started playing. And so I became like very popular to hang out with these guys and their friends. And so Angus invited me to come around. I used to come around every weekend. We moved away from that area, but stayed in touch. So on the weekends, I would go around. We'd bring my guitar and hang out for the weekend. And I don't know, for several months, did that. I'd sleep over there. I'd go home on the Sunday. That was it. I mean, their household was, they were obviously lots of, kids, but most of them were grown up and had moved out now. So it was Malcolm and Angus still living at home. Their nephew, Sam, which was his sister's boy, an older sister, who lived there with her husband with the parents. And they had their nephew, who was kind of taller than them, although quite a bit younger, because they weren't very big guys. Malcolm and Angus are kind of small, so it was kind of, yeah. So I hung out with Angus for a while, and Malcolm as well, and yeah, that went on for a while. And of course, things change, you move on, and still, see them. Especially Malcolm stayed in touch. So I mean, I drifted off. I was doing a couple of years, roll by. I see my parents. When we got to Sydney, I hated the school so much. I quit. I was 15. I quit school, and so I got this job in a music store as a kind of trainee, learning how to repair saxophones and stuff like that. It was just the thing that kind of came my way, and then my father got a job in Newcastle. He got a job in a club up there at South Leagues Club, I think it was. So they moved up, and I stayed in Sydney. I was 15. I was living on my own in Sydney. So, which at the time I thought, hey, this is great. I can do whatever I want. I got no parents around. And I moved into a house with some guys, friends of Malcolm and all that. And, that was like home for me, was with these guys. We had a little band at home. We make loads of noise, and crazy kind of place. But I had a girlfriend, and then we had no parents who were keeping an eye on us. And so she got pregnant, and we were like together. We lived together for a while. My son was born. One day we were in an apartment. I'm working, still trying to support my family and everything. There's a knock on the door. Friend of Malcolm's, and he says, "Malcolm's forming a new band, and he wants you to come and, he heard you've got a bass guitar, and would you come and have a jam and, see what happens? Like, can you come tonight? Can you come now?" And I said, "Well, yeah, okay." And so I went with this guy, friend of Malcolm's, to a rehearsal place, and he had the plans of creating a new band, and I started doing that, playing bass. That was the start of AC/DC. It wasn't called AC/DC at that point. That came a little bit later, but just kind of banging out new tunes and trying ideas, and drummers, trying to find a singer. And then Angus came in after a few weeks, and, they seemed to lock their guitars together. And, it was a bit of a thing. And the thing was that their older brother, George, George Young from Easy Beats, Harry Van and George Young, were moving back to Australia from Britain. And they were going to be working at Albert's as A&R. I mean, I didn't really appreciate what all that meant, but I knew everybody said, "Oh, the Easy Beats were a big band," and and I saw the gold records on the walls at the home and everything, because I hadn't heard of them before in California. It never crossed my radar. But so George came, and he'd been sort of, in a way, kind of remotely coaching Malcolm on, getting a band together. Then the next thing, they found the name AC/DC to make a good name. And then we were going to go into the studio, Studio 301. So this is about 1973, I suppose, by now. And we recorded 3 songs. It was a new experience for me, but I really liked the idea of recording. The whole recording process I mean, I'd picked up on it before. Around at the Young's place, Malcolm had this sound tape recorder, which I think he probably got from his older brothers. Kind of play around with this, to see how you can write songs, and add tracks and bass line and play the guitar. And, so going into an actual studio, and it was pretty exciting stuff. But all the while, I mean, I had a son, a baby at home and all that stuff. So, I mean, I really wasn't a good fit for AC/DC. That didn't last too long after that.
Do you remember the first gig you played with them, AC/DC?
Well, I'm not sure which one was the first one, but I mean, when they had the name AC/DC, I mean, we did play at Checkers
Yeah,
a few times. I do remember those. And there was a New Year's Eve that was because I didn't have a bass amp. So I remember that because Malcolm would ask the other bands that were on, if we could use their amp, if they were there and they usually said, yeah, sure. So I'd play through their amp. And if I couldn't, then I'd have to go into the PA and you couldn't really hear it properly. And it's a bit of a drag. I just didn't have one, didn't have a bass amp. It was great when you had an amp, but oftentimes we'd play first and then we'd go back on again last. And by them, they'd want to go home. So they'd take it. So in the last set, I didn't have an amp. It was always a bit frustrating and a bit crap.
Had no idea that you guys were playing a lot of Chuck Berry and Rolling Stones covers at that time.
Yeah, we had to have enough to play. I guess ultimately you really want to have 2 45-minute sets or an hour and a half to cover it. But with the original songs, there weren't that many. So we did some covers, yeah. What I do remember, I think it was something about, was it Chuck Berry? I don't know, something about knocking. Not the Rolling Stones, can you hear me knocking? Not that one. It was like, I hear you knocking, but you can't come. Maybe it was that one. I can't remember, actually. I remember some of the original ones. There was Can I Sit Next to You? Something like Rockin in the Parlour. That was one, because we recorded those ones. And there was another one that we recorded. I can't remember the name. But on the gigs, yeah, I really don't remember all the tunes. But such early days. I mean, the band was really just so green at that point, and still a lot of development to take place, But it always felt like there was something there, and that it was going to happen because of the connection with the George and Harry Vander, but also there was a very focused commitment to doing something, particularly from Malcolm. It was very, you knew something was going to happen. And it did. There was no surprise to me. Maybe a bit surprised when it really got internationally big, like as it did. It did, and still going, and very popular band, respected, and good reason for that,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned there some of the recordings you did and some of the early original songs the band did, and I'm thinking, like, did you ever, like, witness them ever, like, writing a song, or did you ever get to see that process happening, or did you just kind of just play them?
No, I think Malcolm would write, even, when he was living at home with his parents when we were going around. And like I said, he had this sound on sound tape recorder, which was like, in those days, was like how people wrote their little demos. And he would write tunes like that. And I wasn't there when he wrote them, but I could hear the process and everything. And I wrote songs where I started to construct songs with songwriting. I think it inspired me to do it. This is before AC/DC. This is when I'm like 15, 16 years old. And I started writing tunes and a process of like verses, choruses, lyrics, riffs, different chords, things you're going to, and all that kind of stuff. And the idea of recording, I love that, and I just wanted to get into that anyway. And I wanted to always, a big thing with my life was always trying to get to break in, because in those days, like I said, we didn't have access to making a record. You had to go into a studio, and it cost a fortune. And like you're paying by the hour, and you had to have an engineer there, and you're paying him by the hour. Because the studio's not going to let you have it on your own. They're going to blow something up. You'll ruin the speakers. Something will happen. It's a very expensive process, and you felt like you were locked out. You weren't allowed to get in there and do that. And so I always wanted to do that, and that's why when I got the sampler, it gave me a bit of power, and then you could record it. That was it. Now anybody can record at home. And yeah, I mean, I was aware of like Malcolm's songwriting. Angus, I never thought of him as a songwriter, but I'm sure he's written quite a lot of stuff. But Malcolm, with AC/DC, he would bring the songs in, and you'd play, work on them in the studio. But he already had the lyrics, the ideas, and the verses and the choruses and all that, and riffs. We just play on them and try and find a thing and develop them a bit. And I remember George coming in and hearing, we played something that we were doing, and he said there was one we didn't have any words for or something, and so George wrote some words on the spot. What about this? And he just wrote it down on some paper and just gave it to the singer, and he's saying that, and he said, "Oh, well," he said, these are kind of negative, these lyrics. I don't really like them like this." So George goes, "Oh, that's all right." And he give it back, and he rewrote it and made it positive, handed it back just like that, bang, singing, wow, he's doing a song. It's like, it's pretty inspiring to see that in action, because some serious songwriting in that family. George Young, Harry Van and George Young are phenomenal writers, written all sorts of stuff, and just do it, So I'm sure I was inspired by that.
With the internet coming on, and that your name's out there now as an original member of AC/DC, and it seems like the internet knows more than what you do. It seems like they've kind of taken your story and kind of said things that maybe aren't always true. And I wanted to ask this question because I think it's not I haven't been able to find anywhere on the internet where this is clear. And it's, what songs did you because you mentioned there, like, you recorded some songs with AC/DC, and what were the songs you recorded?
Well, what I remember is I think we had about 2 nights we went in was the thing I was doing. It was the first time in the studio with George and Harry. Got some time at Studio 301. It was at night, like the night shift. And we did Can I Sit Next to You, Rockin in the Parlour, and another tune which I don't remember the title of. And so there's 2 days. So we put some stuff down the first day, and we went back in the second day. And I remember there was one song when they said, "Oh, there's a problem with the bass on this one. Can you do it again?" So I went, and I, at this point, it's the first time I've ever been in a studio. I've got headphones, and I'm playing along to the recorded track. And I don't know, there was some problem, and it wasn't quite working out. So, and we didn't have all night. We just like, so they said, "Well, just leave it." And so I think that song needed, in the end, whatever song that was, I don't remember which one, but I think in the end George maybe played the bass again himself. So I think what's happened is when they've released it, because I don't know how it was released. I think it was put out, but it didn't have my name on it when it came out. I did go down and see George Young and played him a demo of some new stuff I'd done afterwards, after I'd finished and I'd moved to Newcastle. We said, "Well, what happened with those tracks? Like, am I going to get any money for them? And they said, "Oh, no, because you owe us money." Like, what? And they said, "We replayed played them. We played them over." And when I heard the tracks, which I had heard them, it sounded like me. Maybe on one song it didn't, but like it sounded. I thought that was me. But maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
So I myself really don't know for sure, but I've always suspected that there's something of mine on there, but my name isn't on it. I'm not sort of like trying to instigate a lawsuit or anything like that, because that's all finished years ago, and it was George said, "Oh, I've played the bass," and I always thought, well, he's just said that to make it simple, so I'm not going to go, "Hey, that's me. I want some money," or something like that. That's what I've always thought. And I thought, well, maybe he did have to repair that song that there was a problem on, but they were happy with the things on the first night. They're going, "Oh, that's great." It's like, I felt like, yeah, this is cool. I think I was a little bit cocky when I was in the studio somehow. I thought when I was that age, I think I just thought I was really great, and I didn't really know that much about AC/DC. About the easy beats, and I didn't realize, in hindsight, I should have just kind of shut up. But I was I think I was a bit cocky. So I don't know. And like you say, it's not clear. Well, it's not really clear to me either, but and it was such early stuff, and it was never anything big with those early tunes. It wasn't until Bon was in the band that it started to really kind of go, like, people started going, "Whoa, what's this? Who are these guys?"
You mentioned there the later stuff with Bon Scott, and I don't know how much you've listened to those records, like, the later AC/DC stuff, but have you ever listened to one of the records after you departed? and kind of gone, oh, I would have done something differently, like musically there, or like, because I mean, coming from that jazz background, I mean, would you? I mean, like, I don't know, like, are there things that come to your mind, like songs you would have done something different, or yeah.
Well, I mean, you can't really dispute they've done it the way they've done it. I, definitely am from a different kind of. I have a kind of a jazz DNA, I guess you'd say. You know, I mean, I have played in Australia. There's a lot of rock. It's very rocky, and the kind of stuff that I naturally want to do is different. I mean, I've learned to play the rock stuff on the guitar now, but it's not really me. You can put it down to when you have a chord, like a G chord, G, D, G, and maybe you can put a B in it too, like with the third. A power chord is just going to be like the root and the fifth, and then the root again. Man, that's AC/DC they're playing triads that are kind of almost just with the fifth, but they do, they're triad chords. So there's three notes in a triad, obviously. With jazz, they extend it to have more notes on the chord. So they have a 1, 3, 4, they put a 7 and a 9, and they keep going. They go up to an 11 and 13. That's what gives it this different sounds. It's, there's chords on top of chords kind of thing. And I like that sound. So, whereas like in AC/DC, you won't hear that sound. They don't, it wouldn't work. It doesn't fit. It's just two different things. That's all. I don't a lot of people go, oh, you must feel terrible. You missed out on all that. Well, I don't. It's funny, but I don't, because it's not my kind of music. And really, and I don't dislike it. I think they make some great records. And my favorite time was when Bon was in the band, and Highway to Hell, and I think it's a pinnacle for me. I do think it's quite a nice work of art. I sort of get it. I think there's a genius in the way that the chords are done there, and the way it all comes together, and the rhythms too. When you hear the drums are kind of sitting on a beat in a very relaxed way, I might add. But it's the sharpness of the rhythm of everything, pushing and pulling and syncopating. It's very sophisticated stuff. There is a lot of harmony going on in there, for sure, between the chords, those triads, the way that they're kind of working around each other. And but like I say, I'm attracted, I'm pulled towards chords that are a little bit more rich in harmonic overtones and stuff. It's not me, because it's not. I'm never gonna. And I think they knew that. I think George and Harry could see that back then, and I think they probably said, "Well, he's probably not right for this band." No complaints from me. After that, the relationship with the mother of my son and I, we kind of fell apart. And we were very young. We were just way too young to be having a baby, and just the pressure and everything was too much. So it was around the same time I'm finished with AC/DC, and then my relationship finished as well. And so I was a little bit lost in Sydney at that point, kind of flat, kind of hit from the years before living there, all my friends, everybody kind of moved away and lost touch. And so my father said, why don't you come up to Newcastle? So I went up, and there was a lot of bands up there, live music, everywhere, pubs, and it was a thriving live music scene. So I kind of went up and started getting involved in that, and was located up in Newcastle at that point. After a bit, I had a band called Broadway, which started gigging around everywhere. And I was determined to write songs. I wanted to do original songs, which I don't really think anybody else was doing in Newcastle. It was all covers bands. We did a lot of covers, but then I started adding originals in, and that can be a little bit like the kiss of death sometimes, because you want to do that and develop that, but people go, well, what's this? We want to hear, whatever, the Doobie Brothers, or, songs that other bands are playing, which, so we're kind of trapped between what we want to do originals, but go to that. But I persevere and keep writing them and stuff. And then eventually we had this band called the 88s in Newcastle. Then we moved back to Sydney with that band. I was part of that kind of pub rock scene, which was taking off around then. It was in the late 70s. The new wave, they call it new wave, like Joe Jackson and the Police, just after punks, kind of punk rearranged a lot of stuff. So yeah, we moved to Sydney with Chris Murphy brought us down. He was an agent and he had on his books only a few bands. He took us at In Excess, I think Midnight Oil for a while, but a few other bands, but he dropped everything and went with In Excess, started managing them, But we were living in Sydney then, and we had a song, She Fell in Love with James Bond. We got on Countdown and on the radio and stuff. Yeah, we did that for a few years and moved on. And then that was, I formed Non-Stop Dancers. It's kind of a different sort of band, I was playing sax in that band quite a lot, and guitar and singing, and it was a bit different from a lot of the other bands, really. Like we had two females in the band who were playing instruments. They weren't just sort of like singing and stuff. It was keyboard and bass player. We had a kind of I don't know, it was like a tongue-in-cheek cabaret image, with dinner suits, but they're kind of shredded and torn up like we've been to really wild parties and stuff, And like I used to lay on the floor and play the sax, which was incredibly unique thing to do. What a showstopper! What an entertainer! I did it on Countdown. I laid down on the floor. So yeah, we did that for a while, and when that reached the end, I was in Sydney, and I started working I started getting some work with a guy who had produced one of our records with Non-Stop Dancers, Ricky Fattar, the record producer, drummer. And I started working with him in the studio, doing kind of, it was in the early days, of MIDI stuff, like programming things with a sequencer. We worked on a movie with Tim Finn, Les Patterson movie, Barry Humphries, Les Patterson Saves the World as well. Tim did the music, and Ricky was the producer, and I would work on the production team. And with that, I learned a lot about sampling, because of course I was a musician first, but I was getting into this, programming, and with the use of a sampler, it was like you could work with recorded music, like snippets of recorded music, and sequence it in, and it was kind of empowering kind of thing in the day, to do that. Basically, I guess that's kind of hip hop was built on that. And not that I wasn't doing hip hop, but I was just doing a musical thing with programming and a sampler.
The Surprise Surprise album in '84, and there's a really good song in that I really, really like. It's called Spider and the Fly, and I was just kind of thinking, like, how did that song come to be? Like, do you recall how that kind of came to be, that song?
Yeah, well, I wrote that one. Well, I think it was... in those days, I was parking cars in Australia Square, where you get in the car and drive it and park it, pack them in, finish about, after lunch, catch the bus home, and then work on the band stuff. And I used to kind of get ideas on the bus. I could fall asleep, and I come up with ideas. I get home and I go, what was that? And I'd work it out. We did that as a kind of ska rhythm, you know what I mean, with the
Yeah.
Because Jane in the band had written a song with that kind of thing, and I liked it so much that I wrote one too, and it was with this Spider and the Fly. Yeah, it has that thing, but it does have some kind of jazz type changes in it, I'd say. Would you think that with Spider and the Fly? It has almost like a Latin jazz type sound or something.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely unique, and I mean that's what I like about it so much. And I mean a lot of the that band's work was unique. How would you just when you were kind of forming that group and like trying to find its sound, how did you guys go about that? Because as I said, it's unique, and as you kind of highlighted there, it's just such a unique sound.
I'd been playing with the 88s before that, and we'd done all the touring around in Melbourne and Brisbane and Adelaide, and doing Countdown and Donny Sutherland's show and all that kind of thing. And you meet, you see a lot of stuff. There's like a big learning thing. And I started thinking, well, I'd like to do something that's not really so kind of rock, I guess. It is rock. It's just a different type of thing. And there was a lot of, I suppose, a lot of British bands that were doing that. Like the Police they were kind of using jazz chords and a lot of stuff there. There were a lot of bands that weren't necessarily hard rock, with crashing power chords, grunting, snarling vocals. They're a little bit more musical, but they were still kind of witty and poppy and all that. And I kind of wanted to get move that way a bit, And a couple of the people that joined the band that we put together were English. There's Kevin and Jane. I guess they had an influence of that kind of stuff as well. So we just started writing a collection of tunes, and it's Karen on bass, and my brother Brett was playing drums. I mean, there was a lot of energy. It had an entertainment. We did try to entertain.
I mean, just before we go, I just wanted to highlight too, you have your first, I think your first solo album came out in 2021. You've been in music for so long. I mean, it must have been great to get your first solo record out, that's yours, yeah.
Well, it's those tunes. I basically kind of wrote them in over, I don't know, 7 years, something like that, of my traveling with into Morocco and across Europe and all that, and coming to Britain and busking and all that. And they were kind of songs I wrote in that period and following it, and just I had a bunch of tunes. So then I met these people around where I live here in Huddersfield now. We were able to put a little band together, and they liked the songs, and I recorded them in the studio that I now make the jazz backing tracks. And I just basically used all the same equipment. I mean, it's live. The drums, there's some great drumming on there from Caroline Bowden, and the bass is a friend of mine who lives around the corner, Ben Crosland, and the keys, Jeremy Platt is a great player. They're all jazz musicians who can play anything. So, I mean, that album isn't really jazz. I guess it's jazzy, but it doesn't really fit into jazz. People often say, "Oh, it's a bit like Steely Dan or something." It's my kind of Californian roots, I suppose, coming out. But they're just songs that naturally I wrote, and we did those, and we got the album all pressed up and ready to go. And then COVID hit, so we didn't really take it out live all that much. But I just released it anyway, put it on, Spotify and all that, and it's had a lot of plays on Spotify, which is
fantastic.
Which is great.
Yeah.
I've kind of really moved on from that now. And we're working on some different things now. Yeah, we're just kind of working on a 3-piece band where organ playing the bass on, Jez Platt's playing the left-hand bass, and I'm playing guitar, and there's a drummer. It's very early days, so we're still working at it, developing that. Of course, I used to play the sax, you see, but in 2008, I had a tumor in my cheek, and it was turned to be malignant, so they had to take it out, all of it. So there was a surgery, a little bit invasive, and it ruined my embouchure, so I can't play the sax anymore. So that was a big loss to me because, although I'll probably play more guitar than sax, but the sax still was a very important instrument to me. And it was kind of sad to lose that thing. But, so I went on. But just recently, I've found that I can play an electronic sax. And because it doesn't need that much wind power, I can blow it and I can get a good response. And I found a particular sound that I find very expressive, and it really feels like playing a horn. So, because a lot of the sounds that come out that you get are synthesizers and stuff, and I just don't like them, and I can't use them because there's no point. It's just like, but the sound that I have found, which is a Harman mute, so it sounds like Miles Davis, the trumpet, that muted sound that he gets, but it's very expressive, like you can blow it hard or soft. It's very rich in its responsiveness. So I'm really happy about that. So I've been playing that just recently, and that's been a great thing. I'm really excited about doing that. There'll be a bit of that on my new project, which people might get into that are listening to this. Go and check it out. Hopefully connect up there.
Looking forward to this upcoming project, Larry, and look, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, it's been fantastic talking with you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
That was the original bass player of AC/DC, Larry Van Kriedt. To keep up to date with Larry, you can head to his website at larryvankriedt.com. Remember to share this show with other music fans. And if you really enjoyed it, we'd love it if you let us know. Thank you for tuning in to Vinyl Vibes on 2NUR FM, and to all those music lovers out there. Stay groovy.